Donald Trump, let's not forget that one of the reasons that that the wheels came off this authoritarian project so fast is that Donald Trump is basically lazy. And, he doesn't like dealing with problems and doesn't want he wants those cabinet meetings where everybody says, "Sir, you are the greatest golfer since Kim Jong-un." That he doesn't need any trouble. So could it become that Exeth becomes such an embarrassment, so difficult, such an albatross around his neck that he says, that he gives him a pardon, hands him to some other job. I don't know. But you wouldn't have thought that would have happened to Mike Waltz. But I mean, look at that. Look at that house of cards that went down. Mike Waltz had to be gotten out of the White House.
Pete Hegseth must go now. No need for ambiguity with the latest from The Atlantic. It's from Tom Nichols, a professor emeritus at the U.S. Naval War College for 25 years. Welcome back into the Sanity Podcast. Dave and Allison here with our friend Tom Nichols and my former castmate at Succession, which I want to ask you about in a while. And Allison has some interesting insight on being a cast member of a hugely popular show, albeit minor.
Wait to hear about it. Oh, the
Good to see you, Tommy. Great to have you back on the program. You really danced around it with the headline in your latest piece in The Atlantic, but why now? There's been so much, really.
Well, first, let me apologize for leaving everyone grasping for nuance. In a piece that was titled "Must Go Now." Actually, I wrote a while back that his patriotic duty after Signalgate, I said Pete Hegseth's patriotic duty is to resign. But resigning because you've screwed the pooch and texted out classified stuff, that's to be a good example to other people in the defense community, of which I was a member for years and years. That's different than being so awful and possibly a criminal in this whole situation. Although, I think everybody deserves an investigation before, getting that label. Really, it's just his ability to be effective in the job. First of all, he was completely underqualified for the job, totally not qualified, has been screwing it up from day one. But now, really, this is not somebody who can be effective in this job. When you've got to send the Secretary of the Army to go talk to the Russians, that's probably a sign that you don't want the Secretary of Defense, out there bumbling around and the Russians kind of smirking and sniggering, behind their hands.
But tell us more about that, Tom, because you wrote about that in the article and I'm interested. So in other words, normally in a normal administration, the Secretary of Defense would go to negotiate with the Russians. But this time, Pete Hegseth was not sent. And you see that as saying what?
Well, normally the Secretary of State and other senior people, the Secretary of the Army is not, I can't think of a time when as they would call them in the defense world, Sec Army. I can't imagine the last time they sent someone like that to go negotiate with somebody. If you're going to send the top defense guy to meet with the top defense guys, look, the rule in international diplomacy is like meets like, right? You don't send senior people to meet with junior people. You don't send junior people to talk to senior people. If this is a ministerial, you do it at that level. But I don't think, I just don't think the Russians, first of all, he doesn't know what he's talking about most of the time. This is a guy who literally, like 2 days ago, talked about the fog of war being literal smoke over a boat, which, is not what the fog of war is. And I think, too, the Russians just can't take a guy like this seriously. They just can't. A friend of mine called me the other day, because as some of you may know, I began my career in Russian studies. And I was a Russia head and a Kremlin guy. And one of my fellow Kremlin nerds called me and he said, "Can you imagine Belousov, the Russian defense minister?" He said, "Can you imagine Belousov right now sitting there going, 'This is my opposite number. This is the guy in Washington I'm supposed to pick up the phone and talk to during a crisis? Are you kidding me?" And I think somebody in Washington gets it and says, you just can't send Pete. You can't send him out to do the important stuff.
The word is that, Laura Loomer at least feels that as an effort to appoint the Secretary of the Army.
Well,
Well, hey, look,
actual spit take, Dave. I
That
just
was almost an actual spit
hey,
take.
look, if you guys dismiss that opinion, you're not fucking paying attention to this movie, guys. She might be the most influential person in the fucking White House. Like,
I
you
have-
guys not
I
been
have
watching
said
this
so.
movie? Okay, okay.
I've
She's got an
written about
office-
Laura Loomer and said that, you know, is no one
I just wanted to
noticing?
be clear about.
Yeah,
She is no
I hear you,
joke. She
Dave.
is influential in this White House, has an office in the Pentagon. Anyway, her point is that the Secretary of Army, there's an effort, whether it's deep staters or whatever it is, to appoint him if Hegseth is the fall guy. But let's address, before we circle back to the Russians, this whole allegation of a war crime, the double tap strike on a drug boat in the Caribbean. It appears that we destroyed survivors of a strike, which hence the double tap strike. Is this to you a war crime, Tom?
Oh, it's not to me, to this planet. It's in the DoD, manuals. I mean,
the war manual that Senator Atkins read on the air on CNN last night. The law of war manual spells out exactly this scenario as being a war crime.
And it's people who have been rendered incapable of combat, and the laws of war manual says, for example, if they are shipwrecked, this isn't the principle in the laws of war. And to the United States, until a year ago, was a strong pillar of these arguments. I remember our guys committed crimes in Vietnam, and we sent Cali to jail. Now Nixon commuted his sentence. Let's not open that ugly issue, but we had a very public trial about something like this. But the general rule is, once someone has been rendered incapable of combat, whether they're injured, they surrender, they're shipwrecked, whatever it is, to attack them again is a war crime. It is a fundamentally inhuman thing to do. It doesn't matter if they're because you're getting a lot of the MAGA guys who go, well, they're drug dealers. It doesn't matter if they're drug dealers. It doesn't matter if they're the Wehrmacht. It doesn't matter. Once they are surrendered or out of combat, that's it. You can't keep shooting at them.
It's unequivocal. I like that, Tom. I mean, it's unequivocal that if they're incapacitated, you don't keep shooting them. You don't murder them just for the sake of murdering them. And so, but I just want to backtrack a little bit. We're taking the administration's word that these are drug traffickers. I mean,
it doesn't matter if they're drug. It doesn't matter who they are. That first of all, if they were not drug traffickers, then of course there is the bigger problem that you have screwed up and you've blown up some civilians. These strikes, by the way, whether they're drugs or not, these are not legal strikes. The double tap, that's an outright, no kidding, nothing but net war crime. Okay, but striking these boats on the high seas, without trying to interdict them, without warning, without any kind of approval from Congress, all of that. The president of the United States cannot just say, I dubbed thee a narco-terrorist and now I will extrajudicially execute you. That's not how any of this works, but it's something that Donald Trump really feels strongly he can do, because he's all about these flashy shows of power.
I want to get your thoughts on Pete's explanation. This came on Tuesday.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. And by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He sunk the boat, and eliminated the threat.
He sunk the boat and he eliminated the threat. What's wrong with Pete's explanation there?
Yeah. Give me a break. I mean, he's such a little boy in some ways. Like, well, it wasn't really my fault, and I wasn't there, and I didn't see it, and I had things to do because it's very busy, and I have, signs to hang, on my door. It's embarrassing. First, he says when he thought this was, a kind of macho cred moment. He's like, I watched it all live. I was there. I was in the room, And then this whole thing goes south, and he says, well, we have a lot of things to do. I once they sank the boat, I just got up and left. Okay, first of all, if true, that doesn't speak well of him as the Secretary of Defense, because this was the very first time that you're enlarging the use of American force into a new theater where we haven't done this before. And if you're the SecDef, this is the most important thing in your day. You should be right there until somebody says, this is done, everybody file their paperwork and we move on. Saying, well, we sank the boat, but there's some more stuff we have to do. We'll let you know. I know you're busy. That's just his way of trying to say, I wasn't there during the thing that you didn't like. And I don't believe him personally. I just don't believe that he because that doesn't square with his earlier comments about I watched the whole thing live. Yeah. Now he's saying I watched the whole thing live, except for the part that could get me into trouble.
Yeah, his story keeps shifting, and it's impossible to believe him or impossible to believe, obviously, President Trump. I mean, they just don't have a track record of being honest. But Tom, I do want to inject a little bit of context because, our podcast is called Sanity, and Dave and I have some experience with where Pete came from, and we were Fox and Friends hosts. Pete was a Fox and Friends host. And I do think that this is relevant, actually, for what's happening right now, because not only is Fox and Friends, a clown car and not a serious show or news program, it actually emphasizes conviction and messaging over information and research. I mean, that is by design. And so he spending 10 years there, he went to Princeton. I don't understand quite how that happened, but if he ever had any intellectual rigor, Fox and Friends will stamp that out of you because you actually don't do research. You don't do any fact finding. You're anti-intellectual. And so this is all just, to me, an offshoot of those 10 years of it's all about the message. It's all about the slogan. It's all about TV.
Well, Fox is a constant attempt to drive voltage into your limbic system, and just pump the cortisol. And I mean, you can see it every time he's either near Trump or having to explain something, and he looks right into the camera. And, when he first got bunged up with Signalgate, and he gets off the plane in Hawaii or wherever he was, somewhere out in the Pacific, and he says, and he's talking, somebody asks him a question, and he's nodding, and then he looks, and he's looking right into the camera, and it's like, do you hear me, Mr. President? Don't fire me. And so I think you're right. I mean, the narrative is we kill drug dealers. We do the tough things that other people won't do. The problem is that when someone's asking you a simple yes or no question, you're not on Fox and Friends. It's a yes or no question. Were you there? Did you order this? And I think now, as you've said, we've gotten, 4 different explanations. I love that Trump is doing one of his greatest hits. I heard about it. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about that. The guy that is the Godfather, the boss of all bosses. Anytime something gets tight, it's like a low-level mafia capo. I heard things. I don't know. It's not sure. I wasn't there. And that tells me this is all kind of consciousness of guilt. That if Hegseth had been really a leader and believed in what he was doing, he would have stepped forward and said, listen, forget about Bradley. Forget about anybody else. I'm the Secretary of Defense. I was there. As far as any of you are concerned, I gave the order. If you have any questions, you ask me. If there's a problem, that's up to the president to decide. But I run the Pentagon. You're not going to go after some low-level operator. I'm in charge. And instead, it's like, well, I wasn't there. I got up. I had to go take a whiz while they were doing the bad stuff. I mean, it's horrible. And it's a bad example to everybody in the Defense Department.
So, Tom, do you have your finger on the pulse at all with reporting and your sources and everything of what the admirals think? I mean, what's the Pentagon? What's the reaction inside to all of this, if you have any visibility?
Well, let me just say that I work remotely. So I live here in New England, and I stay out of the Beltway for my own mental health sometimes as long as I can. But I did teach a lot of guys for a lot of years who, a lot of officers, and have run into a few over the past months. And yes, Pete Hegseth is not a popular guy in the Pentagon to begin with. I think he knows that. I think one of the reasons he dragged 800 generals in there was to say, I know you're talking about me. I know you don't like me, but God damn it, I'm the Secretary of Defense. And I think that the perception is growing that he's trying to throw the uniformed military under the bus. That right away. Well, it wasn't me, but I totally support. I mean, this is even your former when even Brit Hume steps forward and says, "Wow, this is just a way of throwing a guy under the bus without saying that you're throwing him under the bus." When Hegseth comes out and says, "Wasn't me, but I 100% support that guy who's really the guy you want." When I support you 100% is like getting a kiss from Michael Corleone. I mean, it really is.
But you don't, and circling back to your piece, you don't for a second think Pete Hegseth does go, do you? I don't recall a cabinet member fired for incompetence, but rather only for a lack of perceived loyalty. And I say perceived because it's not loyalty, it's perceived loyalty to Donald Trump when it should be to the Constitution of the country. Do you think Pete goes? Kalshi has him as the first cabinet member to leave at 30% chance.
But I'm going to take issue with you about one thing, Dave. It's not just he doesn't get rid of people just because of perceived disloyalty. He gets rid of them when they're a nuisance or an embarrassment or just too much trouble to think about. Donald Trump. Let's not forget that one of the reasons that that the wheels came off this authoritarian project so fast is that Donald Trump is basically lazy, and he doesn't like dealing with problems and doesn't want any. He wants those cabinet meetings where everybody says, "Sir, you are the greatest golfer since Kim Jong-un." That's that. He doesn't need any trouble. So could it become that Hegseth becomes such an embarrassment, so difficult, such an albatross around his neck that he says, that he gives him a pardon, hands him to some other job. I don't know. You wouldn't have thought that would have happened to Mike Waltz, but and, I mean, look at that.
Sure.
Look at that house of cards that went down. Mike Waltz had to be gotten out of the White House, and Elise Stefanik, who has been the most loyal Trump sycophant you can imagine, suddenly they call her and say, "You know what? You're going to have to go back to representing that upstate New York district. That UN job, got to give that to somebody else. You just have to suck that one up."
Yeah.
And I mean, listen, these people will push people out of their orbit when they become too troublesome, too embarrassing, too difficult. 30%, yeah, maybe. But I think Dave, I'm just going to say this thing has legs. I mean, this isn't going to go away because there's the problem with the Trump people is they lie when they don't have to. One of the problems for this White House is that they lie even when telling the truth would be easier. And so there's this didn't happen. Well, there's going to be video. There's going to be testimony. The Democrats could well capture the House in a year and start holding hearings. There are going to be admirals who may decide, hey, I'm not going under the bus. I'm going to speak up, and give interviews or give testimony to Congress. You can't just say it didn't happen and move. Like this is what Trump tried with Epstein, right? Well, why are people just move on? Well, no one's moving on.
What about, do you think it holds any water or weight, I guess, that people like Senator Rand Paul are saying out loud, I don't know what's up with Pete Hegseth, but he's not competent. Like, do you think that helps the ball get rolling? Or
yeah, I mean, remember, Hegseth was confirmed by a tie-breaking vote, which is this right off the bat with important cabinet appointments. You should never have to get through the Senate on a tiebreaker, not for something like Secretary of Defense. So, there are a lot of these guys that don't. I mean, Pete Hegseth in Republican circles is not I shouldn't say outside of kind of the MAGA hothouse in places like the Senate, he is not loved. They know what he is. They know that he's kind of a glib talk show host who's in way over his head, a man of very poor character. I mean, he's not an admirable person in any way. And so, Dave, to go back to that 30% number, the only thing is if somebody pushes him, there's, it's like that, the the trust fall scene in Mean Girls, where one of them says, "I'm sorry that I'm so awesome," and then everybody just backs away and she just falls right on the floor. I mean, nobody's going to catch Pete Hegseth if that happens. And right now, the only thing between him and having to go back to being Pete Hegseth is Trump.
I mean, look, Pete's going to have a seven figure contract waiting for him whenever he's done. There's probably a larger question though than Pete, and that's what the hell are we doing in Venezuela? Look, I understand this perceived, I use the word perceived war on drugs, but you can't have a war on drugs when you pardon the former president of Honduras who trafficked
shouldn't even laugh,
400 tons of coke into this country. So what are we doing there? And what do you make of this perceived war on drug lords and cartels?
I've always castigated people who are conspiracy theorists. And I'm like, don't go for complicated explanations. Now I find myself saying, why are we going to invade Venezuela? Because whatever in those Epstein files must be amazingly terrifying. I mean, it seems like I wrote a piece about 2 weeks ago where I pointed out that after it was clear that he was going to lose the vote on Epstein, he really started cracking. Even by his standards, I mean, we're used to him with, sharks and electrocution and My Brilliant Uncle and MIT. He started to really lose it, like, the quiet piggy kind of stuff and the late night texting and, we're going to execute 6 Democrats for sedition. And I mean, crazy stuff. Was it the night before last night? 160 tweets, 160
More than one
posts,
per minute.
One per minute. Listen, my dad lived to be 94. God rest his soul. If when he was pushing 80, if I started getting 100 messages from my father, at late at night, I'd have gotten in the car and I'd have driven home. I would have said, "Dad, are you okay? Do I need to call somebody? Is there something wrong here?" And I think the guy has become completely unstable. I think I think it's gotten to him. And, why are we going to invade Venezuela? Why not? It's a great distraction from Epstein, inflation. You notice now he's like affordability, Democratic. It's a Democrat word. It's a plot. I mean, it's just, there's nothing going right. And for all his talk about his polls, he's basically at the level of the MAGA cult is basically the only positive approval he's getting now. About 36.
I like conspiracy theories as much as the next girl, and I'm happy to think that this is connected to Epstein. But do you think that there's also with Venezuela, this is all so weird and so out of left field? And by the way, we don't know if they're really drug traffickers, and it's happening in the Caribbean. And Venezuela there's a million reasons that this narrative doesn't work and falls apart immediately. Do you think that it has something to do with Trump is very transactional? We know that he needs something. There's always a deal. Did Putin want him to do this?
That's one jump too far for me, Allison. But I will say where I thought you were going is he doesn't really want to attack Venezuela because the other day he didn't rule out, because of course my colleague David Graham wrote a great piece. He said Trump never rules out hypotheticals. How about other countries? Maybe Colombia, sure. Yeah, why not? But I think I guess I'm attracted to the idea that some folks have floated that what he really wants is Maduro to reach out and say, I give up. Tell me what you want. And then it becomes about oil deals or, some other kind of business arrangement or something. But he really seems to be hot to do land strikes in Latin America because I think he wants to see himself as a wartime president. He wants the rally round the flag effect. He wants people to protect him from the consequences of his actions here. Remember, he ran for president, and I say this every chance I get. He ran for president to stay out of jail, get revenge on his enemies, and line his pockets. So everything else is
check.
It's working.
Check. Yeah.
It is. Well, I mean, the revenge on his enemies thing keeps blowing up in his face because his people are so incompetent. But he is going to stay out of jail. Supreme Court has seen to that. And he is lining his pockets. I mean,
handsomely.
Billions. Billions, the most money
Billions.
he's ever made in his life. I thought Bondi would be the first to go because the debacle that has been going after his political enemies. But you did reference the sedition tweet. And of course, that was Donald Trump, the president, saying seditious behavior punishable by death because of this video from 6 Democratic lawmakers, all former members of the military. Really curious your thoughts on this, though.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution.
We know this is hard and that it's a difficult time to be a public servant.
But whether you're serving in the CIA,
The Army,
Our Navy,
the Air Force,
your vigilance is critical.
Okay, we have to give the context that this was prior to the double tap strike on the drug boat. Take that out of the equation because we must. Are you comfortable with that video when these Democratic lawmakers were not holding hearings? There were many former members of the military who were wildly uncomfortable with that video from Democratic lawmakers that felt it was very inappropriate. And you?
I am not one of those people. That's like saying, don't break the law. And by the way, there's a similar video of Pete Hegseth in 2016 saying members of the armed forces will not obey illegal orders. Hegseth, it was just unearthed like yesterday or the day before by Andrew Kaczynski at CNN. It's like Pete Hegseth is blowing a gasket about something that he went to before an audience on video and said almost word for word in 2016. Because why? Because of course you want to. Dave, you said let's take the double tap out of it. I'm not sure I can take the double. I think that these people. I think the Hill. I used to work in the Senate years ago, more years ago than I want to say, but. They know stuff. I mean, I think, they're worried about illegal orders about firing at civilians because Trump wanted to do that in his first term. Remember that one? Can't you just shoot him in the legs? No. I think they're worried about orders to strike these boats because those aren't legal. They may have heard some rumors about firing at survivors. I can't prove that. But, the Pentagon leaks just like any other building. So I think, and also they're members of Congress. They're perfectly within their rights to say we are the Article 1 branch. We're talking to the military. Make sure that you follow the Constitution. In Trump's first term, all the living secretaries of defense got together and wrote a letter to the Secretary of Defense at the time. I think it was because it was Miller and things were getting sporty. And they said, remember your oath, Mr. Secretary. Your predecessors want you to remember that you have to obey your oath to the Constitution. What is about the Trump administration that so many people feel the need to remind everybody in that administration that they must follow the Constitution? Now, Trump had been smart. My colleague John Chade had a great insight into this. If Trump had been smart, he would have said, "What's wrong with you people? Of course I agree with you. Of course I agree that the military shouldn't obey illegal orders, and I never planned to give one. You people are hysterical." Instead, they acted like people who had been caught thinking about illegal orders.
It's interesting. That's really interesting. So, Dave, in our few minutes left here, what do the betting markets think about the time frame for when Pete Hegseth might be gone?
Yeah, they haven't placed the time frame because they have who will go this year. And this year we're about out of time. So Hegseth, Kash Patel, and Dan Bongino are all at 10% chance tied that they go this year.
I'd forgotten about him. I thought he was gone.
Right. It's easy to do that. And he said that.
The funny thing about Bongino is how mad he is that government work turned out to be boring work.
Yeah.
Right? It's hey, this sucks. I have to go to an office every day.
Yeah. Tom, I assume you talk to whether it's officers or rank and file members of the military. And I know it's impossible to characterize everything they say, but how comfortable are they with the things going on right now? Because we don't have that line.
I cannot speak for the military, even when I was, in there every day. I will tell you that I have not encountered anybody that I have worked with or taught or that have reached out or that I've talked with that's comfortable with any of this.
Okay,
That's
you
I think
can.
I in fact just a couple of days ago I ran into a friend who's retired senior officer, and he was talking about the boat strikes, and he's like, after the first strike, you send in medics. You don't hit it again. You have a obligate. You've destroyed this boat. You've taken it out. If you think you're at war and it's combat, you don't hit it again. You go and offer rescue to whoever's left. And if you think they're drug dealers, you interrogate them.
Yeah.
And instead it's it's
Go
what
find where the
what we
drugs are
said, just
coming
killing
from.
everybody.
Yeah,
you-
I have often said on this podcast and elsewhere that the cruelty is a tell. The cruelty that they're doing everything with shows that it's really just about power. Obviously, we know this is not about leadership. And the fact that President Trump appears to have no compassion or empathy, it is contagious somehow. Or maybe he's just surrounded himself with like recognizes like. That
Yeah.
that the people that he surrounds himself with somehow had some sort of telltale sign that they didn't have compassion. But it's just bizarre how quickly we've become cruel, and
Yeah.
that's acceptable to MAGA and the Republicans who go along with this.
I'm going to quote my colleague Adam Serwer, who wrote a whole book about this called "The Cruelty is the Point."
Hmm.
It's performative. It gives this dopamine rush to people who are just angry in ways that they can't even put their finger on. I mean, one of the things that I think Trump really channeled well are people that are just kind of generically pissed off at life. I always think of it as that a lot of what I see out there in MAGA worlds is like the world's worst midlife crisis. I'm just unhappy. I'm unhappy with family and my job and where I live. And Trump says, you know what? I know who to blame for all this, and I'm going to make it hurt. And you saw that famous comment by a Trump supporter, a Trump voter during the first shutdown that Trump engineered in his first term, where she said, because she got fired or she got laid off from the government. She said, I don't understand this. He's not hurting the people he's supposed to be hurting.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair characterization. I won't make you speak for the military. I will, before you go, make you speak for former bit cast members in hugely successful shows. You were in Succession with me, played a television analyst for the election, and Allison was in, of course, House of Cards, one of the great shows.
Still getting the 25-cent reshisuals.
That's what I wanted to ask you
Every
about.
now and then you say, hey, $10.
$10. Like I don't think people realize that people like us get checks, but that we get checks. And I don't know about you guys. I open like 13-cent checks.
Yeah.
I have several of them, and I think, do I take the time to sign them and cash them? Do you guys? Do you get 13-cent checks?
Well, it would cost more to mail it.
Yeah. I recently got one for 5 cents and I was like, that's it. This is not worth my time of endorsing and going on the app. So, but for 5 cents, no. Anything above 10 cents, yes.
The last two checks I got together totaled $43.
That ain't bad.
Not bad.
But what's your threshold?
You should be getting them too. I mean, there every now and then, you get these. There were some good ones early in the first season of reruns. We got some decent checks. What I think is, at least Allison, you had a speaking role. We had dialogue. Most of it, I had a whole bunch of dialogue. Of course, all of it's cut. I'm only in Succession, on TV screens behind Alan Ruck and Jeremy Strong. And, at one point I walked over to Dave. We were all as one of the cast, and we were kind of like, human mannequins, because we always had to be in the background to make the shot right. I walked over to Dave because, we're all pretending to talk. And I said, just want you to know you're doing some very fine nodding over here.
Nobody
did. That's some top-notch nodding. I won't tell you what Dave said in response, but, because we were all sitting there at tables going, that was my acting. This is me acting.
Oh, my greatest scene
Thing.
was standing next to Logan Roy as he delivered his effing Pirates newsroom speech. And it was one of the great moments in my career. And I did absolutely nothing, but just standing next to that man while he worked was awesome. So
You know who
what's your
got, you know who
threshold?
got shafted was, you know who
Oh.
got shafted by having to do a lot that didn't make it was poor Danny Savalos.
Danny Savalos.
Remember, he had to stand, he had to stand there with what was supposed to be a malfunctioning big board. And they couldn't get the big board to malfunction properly. So poor Danny had to do like 300 takes of, looking at the board and going, this isn't right, and then it's like a nanosecond flashing by on the show. People don't understand. I think it's one of the things I learned was how hard people in TV work to produce like 10 seconds of film, remember
I
how
don't
many,
know if that'll happen anymore, though. That'll be AI.
Well, I have to tell you, I learned, I feel very Hollywood knowing this, but I came to love the expression checking the gate because it meant that the director, remember that? Because if it was wrong, they'd say, all right, do it again. And everybody go, and we'd have to, but if if they said, all right, checking the gate. And I finally asked, and apparently it means the director's happy and they're just checking the gate, this little gate on the film to make sure there are no imperfections or dirt or anything as a final test. So I came to love the expression, sitting there with, of course, I wear a suit and tie like you all day. And we're underlined. When I'd heard checking the gate, I was like, yes, I feel so Hollywood. We're checking the gate, Also, does it weird you out now when you watch CNBC and you go, hey, that's my old desk?
Yeah, I think that all the time, man. Like, yeah, for folks that don't know, we rented out the entire network every time we shot.
Yes.
The entire building, not one studio, all of it.
But
And
Dave, how many
everything.
times did you do this? I thought this was a one-off. How many times did you do this?
Oh man, this one episode about the election was like the penultimate episode called America Decides. It was only one episode, but we did like 4 weekends in New Jersey. We did like a month. It was supposed to be 2 days. I said to my wife, and she's like, you're going to New York? You're going to be in, I said, it's 2 days. I'll be right back. And then it turned into like a month.
And we got
gone every weekend.
And we got runners. And it was
amazing.
Man, it was
And the
good old
food was
days.
awesome.
Wait. You had your own trailer?
I did. Do you, Tom?
I did.
You did. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Guys,
we had those that was like condos. We had like slices of so I had there was like a trailer that had like 4 doors in it, but I had my own little dressing room, trailer room. Yeah.
You guys are big stars. I think you've buried the lead here.
Hey, production assistant coming by with breakfast and coffee while I was in my trailer.
Shit, that was good.
That wasn't
didn't
my
suck.
House of Cards experience. That was not my House of Cards experience. Good for you guys.
They treated us well, man. I'm going to go cash some 17-cent checks. Check out Tom Nichols' latest in the Atlantic. Pete Hegseth must go now. And where should they find your work elsewhere, Tom?
That's it. They will find me at the Atlantic, and you can find me on X and Blue Sky, where I prefer to be on Blue Sky, obviously. And I'm Radio Free Tom in both places.
Great to have you, my friend. We always enjoy it.
Good to see you both again. Thanks.
See you, brother.
Thanks for having me.